Tomorrow, a human chain of young people will be formed around the country's power plants. Alireza Rahimi, Secretary of the country's Higher Council for Youth and Adolescence, responding to the suggestion of creative young people and activists from popular groups, invited young people and cultural, artistic, and sports figures to attend, at 2 p.m., to form a human chain around the country's power plants.
I invite all young people, athletes, artists, university students, and our teachers to gather around the power plants tomorrow, Tuesday, at 2 in the afternoon. These are our assets and national heritage, regardless of any preference or political view, because they belong to the future of Iran and to young Iranians.
Another brutal sign of the crisis in the Middle East has emerged. This Tuesday, April 7, 2026, the Iranian regime stepped up its rhetoric and began calling on young people, students, artists, teachers, and other civilians to form human chains around power plants. A few hours before the deadline given by Donald Trump for an agreement on the Strait of Hormuz, here's what happened in concrete terms. Faced with the threat of attacks against strategic infrastructure, Iranian state television and government officials began pushing their own population closer to sensitive targets. The one who made this call was Alireza Rahimi, introduced by state television as the Secretary of the Supreme Council for Youth and Adolescence. The call was broad and open to all. According to the Associated Press, he called on all young people, athletes, artists, students, university students, and their professors to surround plants considered national heritage. Where is this happening? In Iran, with a focus on energy facilities amid a wartime environment and under direct pressure on Tehran. How was this done? Through video, state media, and mobilization campaigns in a movement that tries to turn civilian presence into a shield against possible bombings. And there was another step, which was the mobilization. At another time, reported by the Associated Press, a general of the Revolutionary Guard, Hossein Yekta, appeared on a state channel, encouraging parents to take their children to occupy checkpoints at night. These checkpoints have already been targeted by repeated airstrikes. The AP itself also reported that the basis force has been accepting children as young as 12 years old for this type of role. Something that Amnesty International classifies as a crime of violence. Here is the central point of the story. The regime is not just asking for patriotic support. It is mixing propaganda, emotional pressure, and direct exposure of civilians, including minors, in high-risk areas. Why is this happening now? Because Donald Trump reaffirmed that Tuesday night's deadline for an agreement is final. And he warned that if there is no progress, the United States may launch broad attacks against infrastructure. Reuters reported that Trump said he saw no reason for a new postponement, and he repeated that the Iranian proposal was not enough. The Associated Press adds that the warning includes bridges and power plants, and it comes in the context of the demand to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a route through which about 1/5 of the world's oil passes in normal times. In other words, the pressure is not symbolic. It affects energy, transportation, the global economy, and military risk all at the same time. That's where the situation becomes even more serious. Instead of removing civilians from harm's way, the Iranian regime chooses to place human bodies in front of structures that could become targets. This helps to understand how and why this decision was made. In practice, the government tries to create a political and psychological shield. If there is an attack, there will be images of civilians around the plants. If there is no attack, the regime sells this as a demonstration of strength and national loyalty. At the same time, state television also reported that 14 million Iranians had volunteered to fight, but without providing details to prove this number. The internal message is clear. Turn fear into mobilization and mobilization into propaganda. The situation becomes even more tense because this call does not come out of nowhere. The Associated Press reported new attacks in areas of Tehran, including residential zones, while Israel also warned Iranian civilians to avoid train travel until Tuesday night. This shows transportation infrastructure is now on the military's radar. In other words, the more the regime insists on bringing the population closer to power plants and checkpoints, the more it shows that it prefers to use ordinary people as instruments of war rather than admit weakness under pressure. In the end, the answer to the central questions is harsh and simple. And why? Because the regime tries to prevent or make attacks more expensive, maintain the narrative of resistance, and hide its own fragility behind the population. What emerges is devastating. When a government starts putting young people and even children between those in power and the bombs, the sign is not one of strength, it's one of desperation.